Returning to our story of Joseph, he had been sold as a slave to Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. The Lord gave him success in everything he did, and Potiphar put him in charge of his household and all that he owned. The Lord blessed the household of Potiphar because of Joseph. But then Potiphar's wife tried to seduce Joseph, but he resisted her advances. Then she was really angry with him, and he was imprisoned on false accusations from her. Joseph was placed in a prison where the king's prisoners were confined. The Lord was with Joseph and granted him favour in the eyes of the prison warden and gave him success in whatever he did. The Lord had a plan for Joseph's life, which came to pass because he was obedient and true to God. He kept God's commands and principles, even in the depths of his afflictions. Sometime later, the Lord gave Joseph the interpretation of the dreams of two of Pharaoh's servants, his cupbearer and his baker. The cupbearer was restored to his position, as his dream foretold. And 2 years later, he remembered this when Pharaoh himself has dreams that no one can interpret, and tells Pharaoh that Joseph can interpret his dreams. Pharaoh sends for Joseph, who tells him that he cannot interpret the dreams, but that God will do it. Pharaoh's dreams foretell that Egypt will have a period of 7 years when growing conditions are good and harvests will be plentiful, followed by 7 years of drought, when there will be a severe famine in Egypt and the surrounding countries. Pharaoh tells Joseph that since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You will be in charge of my palace, and all my people will submit to your orders. Joseph becomes Pharaoh's prime minister, and events eventually conform to the dreams he has interpreted. Joseph organized the construction of vast storage facilities and stored up grain while harvest was plentiful. When the famine strikes, Joseph sells grains to not just the Egyptians, but the inhabitants of surrounding countries, including his own family. The full story of this is too long for us this evening, so I'll just summarize. His family don't recognize him, but he knows them and causes them some heartache and anguish before he eventually reveals his identity to them. He then organizes the migration of his entire family to Egypt, where they settle, prosper, and multiply. They become the founders of the nation of Israel there in Egypt. After Joseph is dead, they will eventually be feared and enslaved. Eventually, after hundreds of years, to be liberated by Moses under God's protected might. In many ways, Joseph was the founder of the Israelite nation as a nation. Yes, everything began with God's call to Abraham, but his chosen people didn't become numerous enough to be called a nation until Joseph settled them in Egypt. The story of Joseph is one of heroic redemption and forgiveness. We should emulate Joseph. He went through many trials, being sold into slavery by his brothers and imprisoned unjustly for many years during his slavery. But Joseph always remained faithful to his integrity and core beliefs and remained faithful to the Lord. When we look at Joseph's life, his walk with God never faltered. We can see God's hand on his life from the beginning to the end, and Joseph always gave God the credit for what was being done. He says to his brothers, "Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve a remnant on earth and to save your lives by deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." What amazing humility, forgiveness, and love. The story of Joseph illustrates how problems provide us with the opportunity, promote spiritual maturity in us, and most importantly, prove our integrity. Moses obviously thought he was important, as he gives Joseph more space in the book of Genesis than any other person. Maybe we should take a leaf out of Joseph's book. His story is the story of the whole Bible. It is a story of glory through suffering, exaltation through humiliation. It's the story of the cross and the crown. We can relate to Joseph's story in our own times. Many things are pushing us to compromise our beliefs and dishonour God. Things like the belief system of a postmodern society in which there is no absolute truth. All society is rebellious, trying to force us to accept things that are against God's law. Yes, we need to adapt and stay relevant, but we must not compromise our Christian faith. We must remain a part of society while being apart from it in the world, but not of the world, just like Joseph.